I should have known something was wrong when Lara started wearing perfume to bed, not the kind you spray on after a shower, but the expensive stuff she saved for client meetings, the kind that costs more than my monthly car payment. My name is Wes Farrow, and I'm 41 years old. I used to teach high school English until budget cuts made me expendable. Now I write technical manuals for software companies, which sounds boring because it is. But boring pays the bills, and boring doesn't require me to smile at people I want to strangle. Lara, my wife of 12 years, works at Morrison & Associates, a mid-tier advertising agency in downtown Worcester. She's always been ambitious, always chasing the next promotion, the next corner office, the next chance to prove she belongs with the big players. I used to admire that about her. That was before promotion season started. Quote, Lara whispered, sliding into bed beside me at 2:30 in the morning. Again. Quote, 1. I muttered, not opening my eyes. Quote, 2. Quote. She curled up against me, and that expensive perfume filled my nostrils. Quote, I could imagine a lot of things, like why she needed to shower before coming to bed after a client dinner, like why her phone buzzed with messages at midnight, like why she suddenly cared about her appearance more than she had since our wedding day. Quote 5. I said, keeping my voice flat. Quote 6. She kissed my shoulder and settled in to sleep. Within minutes, she was breathing deeply, probably dreaming about corner offices and expense accounts. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my marriage crumbling in real time. The next morning, I made coffee while Lara got ready for work. She hummed while she put on makeup, actually hummed like she was starring in her own personal romantic comedy. I watched her through the kitchen doorway, noting how she'd started wearing skirts that were just a little too short, blouses that were just a little too tight. The partners are announcing the promotion decisions next week, she said, checking her reflection one more time. Evan thinks I'm a shoo-in. Evan Reddick. I'd met him exactly once, at the agency Christmas party. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits and talked about his weekend house in the Hamptons, married to some socialite named Patricia who collected art and charity galas. Quote 9. Lara continued, grabbing her purse. Quote 10. Quote 11. She either missed the sarcasm or chose to ignore it. Quote 12. After she left, I sat in our kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like ash, staring at the stack of bills on the counter, mortgage, car payments, credit cards, all the mundane realities that kept us tethered to this life we'd built together. All the things that apparently didn't matter when someone dangled a promotion in front of my wife. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I opened my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I logged into our joint credit card account and started scrolling through recent charges. Expensive restaurants I'd never heard of. Hotels in the city when we lived 20 minutes away. A charge from Victoria's Secret that made my stomach clench. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Brian March, who used to be a cop before he started his own security installation business. Beer tonight? Ruth's place? Ruth Malone owned O'Malley's, an Irish pub that served as the unofficial headquarters for everyone I'd grown up with in this town. Teachers, cops, construction workers, the kind of people who said what they meant and meant what they said. Quote 14. I texted back. Quote 15. That evening, I found Brian at our usual table in the back corner of O'Malley's. The place was packed with the after-work crowd, guys still in work clothes, nursing beers and complaining about their bosses. The kind of honest conversation that had become foreign in my own home. Quote 16. Brian said, sliding a beer across the table. Quote 17. Brian raised an eyebrow. He'd been a detective for 15 years before starting his business, and he still had that cop instinct for reading people. You want to talk about it? I told him everything. The late nights, the expensive dinners, the sudden interest in lingerie. Brian listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding like he'd heard this story before. Quote 19. He asked when I finished. Quote 20. Quote 21. I thought about that for a moment, watching the condensation drip down my beer bottle. Quote 22. Brian leaned back in his chair. Quote 23. Quote 24. Ruth Malone appeared at our table, wiping her hands on a bar towel. She was 60-something, had owned this place for 20 years, and knew everyone's business before they did. "You boys look serious," she said. "This about Lara and that silver-haired charmer she's been seen around town with?" My heart stopped. "You've seen them?" "Honey, half the town's seen them, holding hands at Chez Laurent last Thursday, looking real cozy at the Marriott bar on Saturday." Ruth's expression softened. Quote 29. The room seemed to tilt sideways. It was one thing to suspect, another thing entirely to have confirmation from the town gossip queen. Quote 30. I asked. Quote 31. I finished my beer in one long swallow and stood up. Quote 32. Quote 33. Ruth called as I headed for the door. Quote 34. I drove home through empty streets, my mind racing. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made a decision that would change everything. Lara wasn't home yet. Another late night with Evan, no doubt. I went to my office and opened my laptop, then logged into every account we shared. Bank statements, credit cards, phone records. If I was going to expose this, I needed evidence. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The phone records were a roadmap of betrayal. Dozens of calls to Evan's number, starting 3 months ago. Text messages that made my hands shake as I read them. Nothing explicit enough to be called evidence in court, but plenty suggestive enough to paint a picture. Quote 35. Quote 36. Quote 37. I screenshotted everything, saved it all to a folder on my desktop labeled unwavering quote 38. If Lara wanted to play games with words, I could do the same. The credit card statements were even more damning. Dinners for two at restaurants that cost more than I made in a week. Hotel rooms charged during times when I thought she was at the office. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany that I'd never seen her wear. By 3 a.m, I had enough evidence to bury both of them. The question was how to use it. Lara came home at 3:30, moving quietly through the house like she was trying not to wake me. I heard her shower running, heard her brushing her teeth, heard her slip into bed beside me. "How was work?" I asked in the darkness. She jumped like I'd slapped her. Quote 40. Quote 41. Quote 42. I turned to face her in the dark. Quote 43. Even in the darkness, I could sense her hesitation. Quote 44. Quote 45. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, quote 46. Quote 47. She turned away from me. Quote 48. Quote 49. The next morning, I called in sick to work. For the first time in 5 years, I lied to my boss and stayed home. I had research to do. I started with Evan Reddick's social media profiles. The man was an open book, posting photos from expensive restaurants, bragging about client acquisitions, sharing articles about leadership and success. His wife, Patricia, had her own Instagram account, filled with pictures of charity events and art gallery openings. They looked happy. They looked stable. They looked like people who had no idea their perfect life was about to be turned upside down. I found Morrison and Associates' employee directory and started making a list. Every person who worked with Lara, every partner who would be voting on promotions, every assistant who might have seen something they shouldn't have. Then I did something I'd never done before. I created a fake email account and started digging into their professional lives. Brian called around noon, secrets quote 50, quote 51, quote 52, quote 53, quote 54, quote 55, quote 56, and quote 57. That afternoon, I drove to Morrison and Associates. I'd never been to Lara's office during work hours, had never seen her in her professional environment. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed success and ambition. I parked across the street and waited. At 5:15, employees started trickling out of the building. I recognized some faces from the Christmas party, watched them walk to their cars or catch buses home to their families. At 5:45, Lara emerged from the building. She wasn't alone. Evan Reddick walked beside her, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was supposedly casual but looked anything but. They were talking, laughing, completely comfortable with each other, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. They got into his car, a silver BMW that probably cost more than I made in 2 years. I followed them through downtown Worcester, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to see where they were going. The Marriott. Of course. I parked in the garage and watched them walk into the hotel lobby like they owned the place. Evan had his arm around her waist now, no pretense of professionalism. Lara leaned into him, smiling up at him like he was the most fascinating man in the world. I sat in my car for 2 hours, watching the hotel entrance, waiting for them to come out. They never did. When I got home that night, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not technical manuals this time, but something much more important. A detailed timeline of my wife's affair, complete with dates, times, locations, and photographic evidence. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to Patricia Reddick. I'd found her number in the white pages, listed under her husband's name like women used to do before they knew better. Hello? Mrs. Reddick, this is Wes Farrow. I'm married to Lara Farrow, who works with your husband. Silence. I think we need to talk. Patricia Reddick agreed to meet me the next morning at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early and chose a table in the back, away from the morning rush of commuters and students. She walked in exactly on time, and I recognized her immediately from the photos. Tall, elegant, the kind of woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. But there were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she sat down across from me. Quote 61. Kensiki, she said without preamble. Quote 62. Quote 63. She laughed bitterly. Quote 64. I slid a folder across the table. Quote 65. She opened it slowly, like she was defusing a bomb. Inside were printouts of the text messages, credit card statements, and photos I'd taken of them at the hotel. Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages. How long? She asked. 3 months, maybe longer. I only started looking a week ago. Patricia closed the folder and stared out the window for a long moment. 22 years of marriage, 2 children in college, a life we built together. She turned back to me. What do you want to do about it? I want everyone to know the truth. I want them to face consequences for what they've done. What kind of consequences? I leaned forward. The kind that make sure they lose everything they think they've gained. Patricia's expression hardened. Quote 73. We spent the next hour planning. Patricia had access to Evan's home office, his personal files, his schedule. She knew about the company retreat coming up next week, the one where promotion announcements would be made. Most importantly, she knew how to hurt him where it counted most, his reputation. Evan's entire career is built on his image, she explained. The successful family man, the mentor, the guy who does everything the right way. If that image gets destroyed, he loses everything. Exactly. When I got home, I found Lara in the kitchen making dinner. She was humming again, practically glowing with happiness. It made me sick. You're home early, she said, not looking up from the stove. Slow day. How was work? Good. Really good, actually. I think the promotion announcement might come sooner than expected. That's wonderful. You must be excited. She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You're being supportive. It's nice. Why wouldn't I be supportive? You've worked so hard for this. All those late nights, all those extra meetings with Evan, it's really paying off. The uncertainty deepened. Wes, is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately. Strange how? I don't know. Different. Like you're watching me all the time. I smiled, the kind of smile I used to give difficult students. I'm just proud of my wife. Is that a crime? That evening, I called Brian and asked him to meet me at O'Malley's. When I told him about my conversation with Patricia, he whistled low. You're really doing this. I'm really doing this. What's the end game here, Wes? What happens after you destroy them? I thought about that for a moment. I get my life back, my self-respect, my dignity. And Lara? Lara made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Ruth appeared at our table with 2 beers and a knowing look. You boys cooking up something interesting? Just planning a little truth-telling session, I said. Ruth grinned. About time someone around here started telling the truth. You need any help spreading the word? Actually, yes. I need to make sure certain information gets to the right people at the right time. Honey, I've been in the information business for 20 years. What do you need? Over the next hour, we laid out the plan. Ruth knew everyone in town, including several people who worked at Morrison and Associates. She could make sure the story spread through the local gossip network at exactly the right moment. Brian, meanwhile, could provide technical support. Security cameras, audio recording equipment, anything we needed to document what happened when the truth came out. This is either brilliant or insane, Brian said as we finished our beers. Maybe both, I admitted, but I'm done being the fool in this story. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I continued my normal routine, going to work, coming home, pretending everything was fine. Lara continued her routine too, working late with Evan, coming home smelling like expensive hotels and other men's cologne. But underneath the surface, everything was changing. Patricia called me daily with updates. Evan was planning something special for the night of the promotion announcement, she said. A celebration dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city. He'd even bought Lara a gift, something from the jewelry store downtown. Ruth spread carefully chosen pieces of information through her network. Nothing too specific, just enough to get people talking. Questions about Lara's sudden success, observations about her new wardrobe, speculation about her relationship with certain clients. Brian helped me set up recording equipment in my car, along with a long-range camera lens. If I was going to document their affair, I wanted clear evidence that no one could dispute. By Thursday night, everything was in place. The promotion announcement was scheduled for Friday afternoon, followed by Evan's celebration dinner. Patricia would be there, armed with her own evidence and ready to confront her husband in the most public way possible. I went to bed that night feeling calm for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. Lara lay beside me, probably dreaming about corner offices and expense accounts. She had no idea that her perfect plan was about to collapse around her. "Sweet dreams," I whispered in the darkness. Tomorrow would be anything but sweet. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. Lara was up early, spending extra time on her hair and makeup, choosing her outfit with the care of someone preparing for the most important day of her career. "This is it," she said, checking her reflection one final time. "Today everything changes." "Yes," I agreed. "It certainly does." She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck that felt like a stranger's lips against mine. Quote 107. Quote 108. After she left, I called in sick to work again and spent the morning making final preparations. I checked the recording equipment Brian had installed in my car, made sure my camera was charged, and reviewed the timeline Patricia and I had established. At noon, I drove to Morrison & Associates and parked in my usual spot across the street. The promotion announcement was scheduled for 2 o'clock, followed by a company-wide meeting to introduce the new creative director. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "In position. Evan thinks I'm shopping. This is really happening." At exactly 2:15, my phone rang. Lara's number. Quote 110. Her voice was breathless with excitement. Quote 111, quote 112, and Owen at quote 113, quote 114, either quote 115, I said. Quote 116, Inabar. After she hung up, I sat in my car and waited. At 4:30, employees started leaving the building for the weekend. At 5:15, Lara emerged with Evan. They were holding hands now, not even trying to hide it anymore. They got into his BMW and drove toward downtown. I followed at a distance, already knowing their destination, Chez Laurent, the most expensive French restaurant in Worcester, the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than most people's weekly salary. I parked down the street and walked to the restaurant. Through the large windows, I could see them at a corner table, champagne glasses raised in a toast. Lara was wearing the blue dress Evan had mentioned in his text, along with what looked like a very expensive necklace. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "On my way. Showtime." I positioned myself across the street where I could see everything but remain hidden. At 7:30, Patricia Reddick walked into Chez Laurent like she owned the place. She was wearing a black dress and heels, her hair pulled back severely, her face set in determined lines. Even from across the street, I could see the moment Evan spotted his wife. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Lara turned to see what had caught his attention, and her face went white. Patricia walked directly to their table, ignoring the stares of other diners and the concerned approach of the maitre d'. She said something to Evan, her voice too low for me to hear, but her body language speaking volumes. Evan stood up, gesturing frantically. Lara remained seated, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Other diners were starting to notice the commotion, turning in their chairs to watch the drama unfold. Then Patricia did something I hadn't expected. She picked up Evan's champagne glass and poured it over his head. The restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped, every fork paused halfway to every mouth. Evan stood there dripping champagne, his expensive suit ruined, his face red with embarrassment and rage. Patricia leaned down and said something to Lara, something that made my wife's face crumple. Then she turned and walked out of the restaurant with the same dignity she'd walked in with. I followed her outside, catching up with her on the sidewalk. Quote 118. I asked. Quote 119. She said, wiping tears from her eyes. Quote 120. Behind us, through the restaurant windows, we could see Evan and Lara in heated conversation. He was gesturing angrily while she sat with her head in her hands. Other diners continued to stare, some even taking photos with their phones. Quote, 121. I asked. Quote, 122. We stood there for a moment, watching our spouse's perfect evening collapse in real time. What now? Patricia asked. Now we go home and wait for them to come crawling back with excuses and apologies. And then? I smiled grimly. Then we show them that actions have consequences. And Patricia nodded and walked to her car. I stayed on the sidewalk, watching through the restaurant windows as Evan threw money on the table and stormed out, leaving Lara sitting alone among the wreckage of their celebration. My phone rang. Lara's number. Quote, 127, on to quote, 128, on to quote, 129. La quote, 130. Or silence. Then, quote, 131. Quote, 132. Quote, 133. Quote, 134. I hung up and walked back to my car, feeling strangely calm. The first phase was complete. Now came the really interesting part. When I pulled up to the restaurant, Lara was waiting on the sidewalk, her celebration dress wrinkled, her perfect hair disheveled. She got into the passenger seat without looking at me. Quote, 135. She asked as I pulled into traffic. Quote, we get 136. Walked in, quote, at 137. Quote, 138. She was quiet for several blocks. And then, which quote, so 139. Quote, we all turned 40. One dar quote, it turned 41. In, quote, 142. Quote, 143. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. Quote, 144. Quote, quarter 5. I looked at her for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. I mean that by Monday morning, everyone at your company is going to know exactly how you earned that promotion. Everyone in this town is going to know what kind of person you really are. And everyone in our families is going to know why our marriage ended. Her face went pale. You wouldn't. I already have. We sat in the car for a long moment, the weight of 12 years settling between us like a stone. Finally, Lara opened the door and got out. I'll get my things. I followed her into the house, watching as she packed a suitcase with shaking hands. She kept starting to say something, then stopping, like she couldn't find words for what had happened to her life in the space of a single evening. When she finished packing, she turned to face me. Quote, 150. Quote, 51. She nodded and picked up her suitcase. At the front door, she paused. Quote, 152. Quote, 153. After she left, I poured myself a drink and sat in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. Wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, all the accumulated evidence of a marriage that had died slowly and then all at once. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. Quote, 154. I typed back, quote, 155. And for the first time in months, that was actually true. The weekend passed quietly. Lara called twice, both times going straight to voicemail. Evan called once, his message a rambling attempt at explanation that I'd deleted without finishing. Patricia texted updates about her lawyer meetings and the divorce papers she was filing on Monday morning. By Sunday evening, I was ready for the final phase. Ruth had done her job perfectly. The story of Friday night's restaurant confrontation had spread through every social circle in town. By Saturday morning, it was on local Facebook groups. By Sunday, it had reached the church gossip networks and the Monday morning coffee clatch at the diner downtown. More importantly, it had reached Morrison and Associates. Brian called Sunday night with an update from his contact in the building's security office. Lieutenant, quote, 156. Quote, 157. Quote, 158. Quote, 159. Quote, 160. Quote, 161. Monday morning, I dressed carefully. My best suit, the one I'd worn to job interviews and funerals. I wanted to look professional, respectable, like someone whose word could be trusted. I arrived at Morrison and Associates at 9:30, carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression I used to reserve for parent-teacher conferences with difficult parents. The receptionist recognized me from the Christmas party. Mr. Farrow, is Lara expecting you? Actually, I'm here to see the partners, about Lara's promotion. Her expression flickered with uncertainty. I'm not sure they're available for unscheduled meetings. Tell them it's about the circumstances surrounding Friday's promotion announcement. I think they'll want to hear what I have to say. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a conference room with 3 of the agency's senior partners. They looked like men who'd had their weekend ruined by emergency phone calls and damage control meetings. Mr. Farrow, the lead partner began, we understand there was some kind of incident Friday evening. There was, but the incident was just the tip of the iceberg. I opened my folder and spread the contents across the conference table. These are records of a 3-month affair between your new creative director and one of your senior account managers. Credit card receipts, hotel bills, text messages, photographs. The partners leaned forward, studying the evidence with the intensity of men who understood they were looking at a potential lawsuit. As you can see, I continued, my wife's promotion appears to be directly connected to her personal relationship with Mr. Reddick. I thought you should be aware of this before making any final decisions about her new position. The lead partner looked up from the documents. What exactly are you asking us to do, Mr. Farrow? I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm simply providing information that I thought might be relevant to your evaluation of employee conduct and promotion criteria. And if we were to reconsider the promotion decision, that would be entirely up to you. I'm just here to make sure you have all the facts. I left the building 20 minutes later, feeling like I'd just completed the most important presentation of my life. The partners had kept copies of everything, promising to quote 176 and quote in 1:1. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Lara, Evan, even Patricia calling with updates from her lawyer. I ignored them all and drove to O'Malley's for lunch. Ruth was behind the bar when I walked in, and she grinned when she saw me. Quote 178. Quote 179. Quote 108. Quote 181. Quote 182. I spent the afternoon at O'Malley's, accepting congratulations from people I'd known my whole life. Teachers, cops, construction workers, all the folks who understood what it meant to have your trust betrayed and your dignity trampled. At 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Quote 183. Quote 184. Quote 185. Quote 186. Quote 187. I looked around O'Malley's at all the honest faces of people who'd supported me through this ordeal. Tell her I'll be there in 30 minutes. When I arrived at Morrison & Associates, Lara was waiting in the lobby. She looked like she'd aged 10 years over the weekend. Her eyes were red, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. Wes. Lara. We walked outside together, finding a bench in the small park across from the building. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. They fired me, she said finally. I heard. Evan, too. His wife served him with divorce papers this morning. Patricia's been planning that for a while. Lara turned to look at me. You planned all of this. The restaurant, the evidence, the meeting with the partners. You orchestrated the whole thing. I responded to what you did. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like you destroyed my entire life in the span of 4 days. I thought about that for a moment. Your life isn't destroyed, Lara. Your lies are destroyed. Your deception is destroyed. Your ability to pretend that actions don't have consequences is destroyed. But your life? That's still yours to figure out. What about us? Is there any chance we can work through this? I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 12 years, this stranger who'd shared my bed while planning her escape with another man. No, I said simply. There's no us anymore. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I had to ask. For what it's worth, I hope you figure out what you really want. I hope you find a way to be happy that doesn't require lying to people who trust you. What about you? What happens to you now? I stood up from the bench, straightening my jacket. Now I go home to a house that's finally honest. I wake up tomorrow without wondering what lies I'm going to discover. I start over, and I do it with my dignity intact. Wes? I turned back to her. I really am sorry. For all of it. I know you are, but sorry is just a word, Lara. It doesn't change what happened. I walked back to my car, leaving her sitting on the bench in front of the building where her career had just ended. In my rearview mirror, I watched her pull out her phone, probably calling Evan or her parents or someone else who might be able to help her make sense of what her life had become. That evening, I sat in my living room with a beer and the divorce papers my lawyer had prepared. Everything was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months. My phone rang. Brian. Quote 219. Quote 10. Quote 2 unwavering. I thought about that question as I looked around the room. The wedding photos were gone, packed away in boxes. Lara's books had been removed from the shelves. All the evidence of our shared life had been carefully erased, leaving behind only what was truly mine. Free, I said finally. I feel free. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was exactly how I felt. The promotion season was over. The truth had won, and I was finally ready to start the rest of my life.